Let's talk about someone who should be a household name, a doctor, a scientist, a revolutionary, but chances are you've never heard of him. This is the story of James McCune Smith, and he's one of America's great forgotten geniuses.
Okay, so let me ask you something. When you think of the great Frederick Douglass, who do you think he would call his single biggest influence? A president? A famous writer? Another famous activist, maybe?
The answer is a name most of us are probably drawing a blank on, Dr. James McCune Smith. And the fact that we don't know his name, well, that speaks volumes about how history can just bury its heroes. So let's fix that right now.
To really get who James McCune Smith was, you have to understand he was so much more than a doctor. He was one of the most brilliant Black intellectuals of the 19th century, a real activist whose mind was as powerful as his moral compass was strong.
I mean, just listen to what Frederick Douglass himself said about him in 1859. That's not just a casual compliment. That is a statement of profound respect from one giant of history to another. Smith wasn't just watching from the sidelines. He was right there, shaping the very intellectual core of the abolitionist movement.
So where does a story like this even begin? Well, Smith's incredible journey from being born enslaved to becoming a top medical mind really set the stage for his entire life's work. His path was just incredible. You look at this timeline, and it's one obstacle after another. He was born into slavery, freed as a teenager, and immediately graduates with honors. But when he tries to continue his education in America, the door gets slammed in his face. Columbia, Geneva College, both said no because of the color of his skin. So what does he do? He finds a way. With help, he sails across the Atlantic to one of the best medical schools in the entire world, the University of Glasgow, and doesn't just earn 1 degree, but 3. And if you want a single image that captures his unbelievable drive, this is it. To make a living, he became a blacksmith's apprentice, but he never stopped learning. A classmate remembered him literally working the forge with a bellows in one hand while studying a Latin grammar book in the other. That just says it all, doesn't it? So when he comes back to the United States as the first Black university-trained physician in the country, he doesn't just open a practice and a pharmacy. No, he weaponized his knowledge. He decided to use science and statistics to absolutely tear down the racist pseudoscience of his time. You have to remember what he was up against. This was the era of so-called scientific racism. Things like phrenology, this bogus idea that you could measure a person's intelligence by the shape of their skull. And this wasn't some fringe idea. It was treated as legitimate science and used to justify slavery. And maybe his biggest intellectual brawl was with the U.S. government itself over the 1840 census. The government was using its own data to claim that freedom was literally making Black people sick and insane. But Dr. Smith, with his cutting-edge training in statistics, just dismantled their argument piece by piece. He proved it was all a lie, meticulously showing how the census data was garbage. He'd point out how entire towns were listed with more insane Black residents than their total Black population. He used their own numbers to expose the fraud.
And that's the thing about him. He wasn't just some numbers guy. He paired that data with just searing moral outrage. With this quote, he's pointing out the hypocrisy of slave owners who claim to be benevolent while completely ignoring the brutal mortality rates of the people they enslaved. But here's the kicker. Despite all this brilliance, running the first Black-owned pharmacy, treating patients of all races, publishing groundbreaking research, the American medical establishment, they just locked him out, denied him membership. His genius was undeniable, but racism was the ultimate gatekeeper. But make no mistake, Smith wasn't just fighting this war in medical journals. No, his fight against slavery was happening on the streets, in secret meetings, right on the front lines of the abolitionist movement. Think about this. The Fugitive Slave Act passes in 1850. This horrific law forced people in free states to help recapture escaped slaves. What does Smith do? He doesn't just write an angry letter. He gets to work. He organizes something called the Committee of 13, which was basically a direct action group defying federal law to protect and rescue people fleeing slavery.
In his activism, it got even more radical. He co-founded a whole political party, the Radical Abolitionist Party, working with people like Frederick Douglass and John Brown. This wasn't the wing of the movement that thought they could just persuade people to do the right thing. They believed slavery was an act of war, and they were ready to meet force with force if that's what it took.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a pioneering doctor, a brilliant statistician, a radical activist at the very heart of the biggest fight of the century. So, how on earth did he just vanish from history? Well, the answer is just as tragic as his life was extraordinary. To understand why, we have to go to the year 1863. The Civil War is raging, and in New York City, anger over the military draft is about to explode into one of the most shameful moments in the city's history. A white mob, furious about the draft, turned their rage on the city's black community, and they burned the colored orphan asylum to the ground. This was the institution where Dr. Smith had been the medical director for 2 decades. The 233 children inside were saved, miraculously, but the building was destroyed. And the message was terrifyingly clear. New York City was no longer safe.
Dr. Smith died just 2 years later, in 1865, and the final piece of this tragedy, well, it explains why his legacy was erased. After he died, his own children faced an impossible choice. For them to be safe, for them to have any kind of future in a deeply racist America, they decided to start passing as white. And for that to work, the story of their brilliant revolutionary black father had to be buried with him.
And just like that, his story was gone. For almost 150 years, he lay in an unmarked grave. It wasn't until 2010 that his own descendants, who had grown up believing they were white, rediscovered their family's incredible history and finally placed a headstone on his grave. And then, in 2018, the New York Academy of Medicine finally inducted him as a fellow, correcting an injustice that was 171 years old.
And that really brings us to the biggest question of all, doesn't it? The story of James McCune Smith isn't just about one incredible man. It forces us to ask, is someone this important, this brilliant, could be so completely wiped from the record by the pressures of American racism? Who else have we forgotten? Whose stories are still out there, waiting for us to find them?